A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Alright, we have a fun one today. Daniel's prompt is about the absolutely ridiculous history of sloth taxonomy. Basically, how for about 200 years, European naturalists looked at a sloth and just had no idea what they were seeing. They were guessing everything from bears to monkeys to, apparently, just a very poorly made mistake of nature.
It is one of the great comedies of early zoology, Corn. And honestly, it's a perfect topic for today because this episode of My Weird Prompts is actually being powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. So we have an AI helping us navigate the historical confusion of humans trying to categorize you and your kin.
I have to say, reading through some of these historical descriptions, I'm feeling a little attacked. I mean, I knew we were unique, but some of these early explorers were just plain rude. They didn't just misclassify us. They basically used us as a canvas for all their frustrations with the New World.
It's true. When you look at the 17th and 18th centuries, the scientific method was still very much in its awkward teenage years. Naturalists were trying to fit every new discovery into a rigid box based on what they already knew from Europe. And the thing about sloths is that they don't fit into any European box. They are a complete biological outlier.
I love that. We were the glitch in the matrix for the Enlightenment. But before we get into the why of the confusion, we have to talk about the what, because the names they threw at us are incredible. You mentioned bears and monkeys, but it goes way deeper than that.
It really does. You have to imagine these explorers coming off a boat in Central or South America. They see this creature hanging upside down, moving at a pace that suggests it has nowhere to be and all day to get there. One of the earliest and most persistent comparisons was to the bear. In fact, George Shaw in 1794 described the three-toed sloth as the most slothful of quadrupeds, while specifically pointing out that its claws looked like a bear's.
A bear. Right. Because when I think of a grizzly, I think of an animal that spends 90% of its life hanging from a cecropia tree eating leaves. I can see the claw thing, I guess, if you're looking at them from 100 yards away and you've had a bit too much rum on the ship. But the temperament is slightly different.
Well, the bear comparison actually stuck around in the naming conventions. Even today, the scientific name for the three-toed sloth is Bradipus, which comes from the Greek for slow-foot. But early on, they were often called bear apes or sloth bears, which is confusing because there is an actual sloth bear in India, which is a real bear that just happens to like termites. But the American sloth? Not a bear, not even close.
But wait, how did they square the bear thing with the fact that we have tails? Or, well, tiny nubtails, and we live in the canopy? Did they think we were just very tiny, very lazy arboreal grizzlies?
Essentially, yes. They saw the curved claws and the shaggy fur and their brains just defaulted to ursine. It's a classic case of pattern recognition gone wrong. If all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. If all you know are European mammals, every shaggy creature looks like a bear or a dog.
And then there were the people who thought we were monkeys. I find that one slightly more understandable, but also more insulting. Monkeys that forgot how to climb was one of the descriptions. Excuse me? We didn't forget how to climb. We perfected the art of climbing so well that we don't need to rush.
That monkeys that forgot how to climb line is classic, 1800 sass. The logic was that since you lived in trees and had long limbs, you must be a primate. But then they'd watch a sloth on the ground, which, let's be honest, Corn isn't your most majestic moment, and they'd conclude that the animal was a failed primate. They didn't understand that your anatomy is specialized for tension, not compression. You're built to hang, not to walk.
It's a design feature, Herman, not a bug. When I'm on the ground, I'm basically a submarine out of water. I'm not failing. At walking, I'm just between climbing sessions. But these guys couldn't see past their own feet. If it didn't trot like a horse or swing like a macaque, it was broken.
They saw your slow movements as a lack of ability rather than a surplus of efficiency. But the one that really gets me is the giant rat. I saw some notes where naturalists compared us to oversized rodents because our teeth never stopped growing.
I remember that one. It's the teeth, isn't it? Because we don't have incisors, they thought we were just weirdly mutated rats that had lost some parts along the way.
Yes, the ever-growing teeth are a trait shared by rodents but also by your actual relatives, the anteaters and armadillos. But back then, if it had weird teeth and hair, giant rat was a pretty common fallback. But the absolute king of sloth-hating was the French naturalist Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon. In 1766, he wrote this scathing review of the sloth that honestly reads like a modern-day internet troll.
Oh, I've heard of this guy. He's the one who said we were the most imperfect of all mammals, right?
That's the one. He called the sloth a stuffed animal and said that its existence was a mistake. He wrote that the sloth was the lowest degree of existence and that its life was just a misery. He literally couldn't conceive of an animal that wasn't designed for speed or power. To him, if you weren't productive by human standards, you were a biological failure.
Imagine being so offended by an animal taking a nap that you write a multi-volume scientific treatise on why it shouldn't exist. That is a level of petty I can only dream of achieving. But honestly, it shows how much they struggled with the concept of a low-energy niche. They didn't have the words for metabolic efficiency yet.
They really didn't. To Buffon, the sloth was a defect of nature. He actually argued that the sloth's physical existence was a punishment. He thought that because you were slow, you were constantly in pain or suffering from your own sluggishness. It's a very anthropocentric way of looking at the world, assuming that if a human felt that slow, they'd be sick. Therefore, the animal must be sick.
It's the ultimate main character syndrome. If I'm not comfortable moving that way, the animal must be miserable. But that's the technical hook here. The reason sloths were so hard to classify is that they are an extreme adaptation. Most animals are either generalists or they specialize in a way that is obvious to a human observer, like a cheetah being fast or a giraffe having a long neck. A sloth's specialization is being slow. It's a behavioral and physiological specialization that is invisible if you're just looking at a dead specimen on a table in Paris.
And that's a crucial point. Most of these naturalists were looking at dried skins or specimens preserved in jars of alcohol. They weren't seeing the symbiotic algae in your fur or the way your muscles are actually optimized to hold weight without burning energy. They were looking at a broken version of a creature and trying to deduce its soul.
So, when did we start getting some actual respect? Or at least, when did they stop calling us miserable mistakes?
The turning point really started with Carl Linnaeus, though even he was a bit confused. In his 1758 Systema Naturae, which is basically the foundation of modern biological naming, he put sloths in the order Bruta. But here's the kicker, he put you in there alongside elephants and rhinoceroses.
Wait, what? Elephants? I mean, I know I'm big-boned, but an elephant? Where was the logic there?
It was mostly about the teeth, or lack thereof. Linnaeus grouped animals that he thought lacked front teeth into Bruta. Eventually, this evolved into the order Edentata, which means the toothless ones. This was a bit of a garbage bin taxon. If an animal looked weird and didn't have obvious incisors like a dog or a cat, it got thrown into Edentata. That's where you lived with anteaters, armadillos, and even pangolins for a long time.
It's like the miscellaneous folder on a desktop. I don't know what this is. Just put it with the other weird stuff. But even toothless is a lie. I have teeth. They're just peg-like and weird.
The name Edentata was technically incorrect for almost everything in the group except for anteaters, but it served as a convenient weirdo category for about a century, and that lasted for a surprisingly long time. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that things got more rigorous. Richard Owen, the guy who actually coined the word dinosaur, did a massive anatomical study in 1842. He looked at the vertebrae and the muscle attachments. He realized that the way a sloth's body is put together is fundamentally different from a primate or a bear.
Was he the one who looked at the giant ground sloth fossils? Because that feels like it would change the conversation. It's hard to call something a miserable mistake when you find out its cousin was 20 feet tall and weighed 4 tons.
That was a huge part of it. The discovery of megatherium fossils in the late 1700s and early 1800s blew everyone's minds. Thomas Jefferson was actually obsessed with them. He thought they might still be roaming the American West. When people realized that tree sloths were the tiny, specialized descendants of these absolute units of the Pleistocene, the failed animal narrative started to fall apart. You weren't a failure, you were a survivor.
I like that. We're the streamlined, efficient version. We're the minimalist living experts of the animal kingdom. But even with Owen's work, they still didn't quite have the family tree right, did they? I mean, did they realize how long we've been on our own path?
Not quite. They still thought you were a relatively recent degeneration from the giant forms. They didn't realize that the tree-dwelling lifestyle was an ancient and highly successful strategy. The real aha moment came much later, in the 1990s, with the molecular revolution. When we stopped just looking at bones and started looking at DNA, that's when we officially landed in the superorder Xenarthra.
Xenarthra. Sounds like a planet from a sci-fi movie. What does it actually mean?
It means strange joints. It refers to the extra joints in your lower back that no other mammals have. These joints give your spine extra strength and flexibility, which is why you can hang upside down and twist your head 270 degrees without snapping your neck.
See? Strange joints. That's a much cooler name than miserable stuffed animal. I'll take Xenarthran any day. It makes us sound like we have superpowers. But how does a strange joint actually work in practice? Is it like a double hinge or something?
It's more like extra interlocking processes on the vertebrae. In most mammals, the spine is built to support weight from below, like a bridge. In Xenarthrans, those extra joints provide stability for a body that is often being pulled in different directions, whether it's an armadillo digging or a sloth hanging. It's a specialized bracing system that evolved millions of years ago.
In a way, you do. But what's fascinating is that DNA showed that sloths and anteaters are basically brothers, and armadillos are the cousins. They all share this incredibly ancient lineage that evolved in isolation in South America for tens of millions of years. This is why the Europeans were so confused. You guys were playing by a completely different set of evolutionary rules that had been cooking in secret for eons. It's like we were a different branch of the tech tree. Everyone else was upgrading speed and intelligence, and we were just over here putting all our points into efficiency and strange joints.
That's a great way to put it. And the confusion didn't stop at the order level. Even distinguishing between two-toed and three-toed sloths took people an embarrassingly long time. For a while, naturalists thought they were just different genders of the same animal, or maybe just sickly versions of each other.
Oh, look at that one, it's missing a toe. It must be feeling under the weather. Meanwhile, the two-toed sloth is a completely different family. We haven't shared a common ancestor for about 30 million years.
That is the part that always blows my mind. The two-toed sloth and the three-toed sloth are a classic case of convergent evolution. They look similar and live similar lives because they adapted to the same environment, but they are as different from each other as a cat is from a dog. But to those early explorers, a sloth was just a sloth. They didn't have the nuance.
Think about that for a second. 30 million years. That means two-toed and three-toed sloths are more distantly related than humans are to baboons. And yet, because we both decided that hanging from trees was the vibe, people just lumped us together. It really shows how much our human need to categorize things actually gets in the way of seeing what they are. We spent 200 years trying to call sloths bears or monkeys because we couldn't handle the idea that they were just sloths.
It's a perfect example of what's called the Procrustean bed of science, trying to force data into a pre-existing theory. If your theory says all mammals must be active and productive, then the sloth must be broken. It takes a long time to realize that the theory is what's broken, not the animal.
Speaking of broken theories, let's talk about the names in other languages. Daniel mentioned that in Spanish the name is perezoso, which means lazy one. That's pretty much the standard across the board, isn't it?
Pretty much. In French, it's pareço. In Portuguese, it's bicho preguiça. It all translates back to lazy animal. Even the English word sloth is one of the 7 deadly sins. Humans have basically branded your entire species as a moral failing for as long as we've known you.
It's a lot of pressure, Herman, carrying the weight of a deadly sin while you're just trying to digest a leaf. But there is a bit of a silver lining. Because we were so weird and lazy, we actually became a bit of a cult favorite among certain naturalists who like the oddballs.
You did. And as we move into the modern era, that weirdness is exactly why sloths are so important for research. We're finding out that your fur is a literal ecosystem. You have moths and algae and fungi living on you that don't exist anywhere else. Some of those fungi are actually being studied for new antibiotics and cancer treatments.
So, from miserable mistake to potential cure for cancer. That is quite the glow-up. I hope Buffon is rolling in his grave. The most imperfect of all mammals is actually a walking pharmacy. But how does that work? Is the fungus actually part of our biology, or just hitching a ride?
It's a mutualistic relationship. The algae gives you camouflage by turning your fur green in the rainy season, and the fungi thrive in the moist microclimate of your hair. In return, the sloth gets a little extra nutrition by absorbing nutrients through the skin or grooming. It's a level of biological complexity that Buffon could never have imagined from his desk in France.
He probably is. But this brings up a bigger point about how we name things in general. Zoological naming taxonomy is supposed to be this objective, cold science. But it's so heavily influenced by culture and the limitations of the people doing the naming. When we look back at 1800s taxonomy, we're not just seeing the animals, we're seeing the biases of the era. It's like how every new tech thing today is called the Uber for X or the AI version of Y. We can only describe the new by comparing it to the old. But the sloth is the ultimate X that isn't like anything else. It's just the sloth for sloths.
And the challenge for modern zoology is to keep peeling back those layers of comparison. Even now, we're still discovering things about sloth metabolism that defy the standard mammal models. For instance, did you know that sloths can actually slow their heart rate down to 1/3 of its normal speed to conserve energy?
I did know that, actually. It's very relaxing. You should try it sometime, Ermin. You're always so high energy. Just thud, 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 thud.
I'll stick to my double espressos, thanks. But the point is, even with our modern tools, the sloth still surprises us. It took us 200 years to realize you weren't a bear, and another 100 to realize you weren't an armadillo with a gym membership. Who knows what else we're missing?
Probably that we're actually the masters of the universe, and we're just waiting for everyone else to burn themselves out. But seriously, the improvement in naming isn't just about being more accurate with DNA. It's about being more humble with our observations.
Well said. The history of sloth taxonomy is really the history of human humility. We had to admit we were wrong about almost everything. We were wrong about your relationship to monkeys, wrong about your anatomy, and fundamentally wrong about your misery.
I think there's a lesson there for everything, not just zoology. Don't be a Buffon. Don't look at something you don't understand and assume it's a mistake. It might just be operating on a 30-million-year-old plan that you haven't read yet.
I love that. Don't be a Buffon should be on a t-shirt, but it really does apply to so much in technology and science right now. We see these new AI models or new ways of organizing society, and our first instinct is to say, that's not how we do things, so it must be wrong. We try to classify the future using the labels of the past.
And then 100 years from now, some sloth-like AI will be sitting in a digital podcast studio, laughing at how we thought it was just a stochastic parrot.
The parallels are definitely there. But let's get into some of the more practical takeaways from this history. Because it's not just a bunch of funny stories, there's a real-world application for how we handle complex data and classification today.
Right. Like, how do we avoid making Buffon-level mistakes when we're dealing with things we've never seen before? How do we stay open-minded when the data looks, well, lazy?
One of the biggest takeaways is the importance of multimodal observation. Early naturalists were only looking at morphology, the physical shape, but as we saw with the sloth, morphology can be incredibly misleading. You have to look at behavior, environment, and eventually the underlying code, the DNA. In modern terms, that means not just looking at the output of a system, but understanding the architecture and the context it operates in.
So, don't just look at the long claws and assume bear. Look at the heart rate, look at the diet, look at the strange joints. It's about gathering more dimensions of data before you slap a label on it. It's about being patient enough to watch the sloth move before you decide it's broken.
Precisely. Another takeaway is the concept of evolutionary context. You can't understand an animal in a vacuum. You have to know where it came from. The discovery of the megatherium was the key that unlocked the tree sloth. For a listener, that might mean looking at the ancestry of a problem or a technology. Why was this built this way? What did its giant version look like 20 years ago? Usually, the quirks that seem like mistakes are actually holdovers from a previous environment where they made perfect sense.
That's a great point. My slow metabolism wasn't a mistake. It was a survival strategy for a low-calorie diet in a competitive forest. It's an optimization, not a defect. If you don't know the environment the problem was solved in, you'll misclassify the solution. If you think I'm supposed to be a hunter, I'm a failure. If you know I'm an energy saver, I'm a genius.
And finally, there's the value of the outlier. Sloths are the ultimate outliers. For a long time, science tried to ignore them or dismiss them because they didn't fit the curve. But the outliers are often where the most interesting breakthroughs happen. The fact that sloths have a different way of being a mammal opened up entire new fields of study in thermoregulation and biomechanics.
So, embrace the weirdness. If you're a developer or a researcher and you find something that doesn't fit your model, don't just throw it in the miscellaneous folder. That's your sloth. That's the thing that might actually change how you see everything else. It's the anomaly that proves the rule is too narrow.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap up the main discussion. It's been a long journey from bear ape to Xenarthran, but I think we've finally given the sloth the taxonomic respect it deserves. It took 3 centuries, but we got there.
I feel seen, Herman. I feel seen and correctly classified. It's a good feeling. Though I might still tell people I'm a bear ape at parties. It has a certain ring to it. It sounds much more intimidating than slow-footed strange joint.
Just don't try to roar. It'll ruin the illusion.
Fair point. Well, this has been a blast. It's always fun to look back at how much we've learned and how much we had to unlearn to get to where we are. It makes you wonder what people will be laughing at us for in the year 2200.
It really does. And it makes me wonder what we're misclassifying right now. In 20 or 30 years, what will we look back on and realize we were calling a monkey when it was actually something entirely new? Maybe it's the very AI we're using to write this script.
Hopefully something just as cool as a sloth, but probably not. We're a pretty high bar to clear. We have our own ecosystem, Herman. Can your AI grow algae? I didn't think so.
I'll give you that one. Before we go, we should probably do the official business. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the show on the rails while we dive into the history of my brother's relatives.
And a huge thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. They make it possible for us to process all this weird data and turn it into something hopefully useful. They are the Cecropia trees to our sloth-like curiosity.
If you enjoyed this look at the comedy of science, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and join our little community of weird prompt enthusiasts. We promise to keep bringing the deep dives into the things everyone else ignores.
Or you can find us at myweirdprompts.com. We have the full archive there, including all 1,659 episodes, if you're feeling particularly completionist. You can listen to them all at half speed if you want the true sloth experience.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I'm Herman Poppleberry.
And I'm Corn. We'll see you next time.
Take it slow, everybody.
He couldn't help himself. Goodbye. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.